My name is Sean Allingham. I actually came down to Occupy Wall Street from Canada and sort of gravitated toward the People's Library, which is where we are here now in the corner of Zuccotti Park.
I saw a pile of books, so I went to GA and I asked if anybody was taking responsibility for it and volunteered myself and then started this. Everybody who comes down here has questions and they want to know why are we here and what are we doing, and we have information about everything. So if you've got a question, you can come down, you can learn more, you can talk to people, and the library is the center for that to happen.
So I think it's really useful for people to see that there is this side to the movement. It's not just a bunch of hippies with bongos playing into the night and not wanting to get jobs. It's an actual movement with substance, and there's thoughts and ideas that are really fundamental to society behind it.
I mean, I think it's good to educate yourself. So we have a lot of books on politics and on, like nonviolent demonstrations and things that are very pertinent to what's happening right now. So I think that's great. I think you should really educate yourself and then make your decision.
We get donations from individuals, publishers, and celebrities. I pulled 2 boxes of Chomsky out of Tim Robbins' car 3 nights ago.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Conversations on Anarres. I'm Dr. Joseph Orosco. I'm a professor of philosophy at Oregon State University, and I'm the co-director of the Anarres Project for Alternative Futures. The Anarres Project is a forum for conversations, projects, and initiatives that imagine a future free of domination, exploitation, war, and empire. Here on Conversations on Anarres, we talk with scholars, activists, and artists about the possibilities for radical social transformation today. We opened up just now with some scenes from 10 years ago in Zuccotti Park in New York City. During Occupy Wall Street, groups of activists organized a space called the People's Library. Thousands of books and magazines were organized to be available for free to whomever wanted to come to the encampment and to find literature and radical scholarship that could help them make sense of the Occupy movement or the issues behind the movement. The People's Library inspired dozens of other projects and across the country where local activists tried to make books and other media available as part of collective liberation efforts. When the encampment in Zuccotti Park was finally demolished by the police, most of the books that you saw in that short clips were confiscated, and they ended up in the landfill. Today, we're going to talk to someone who is working in Albuquerque, New Mexico to build a project with similar goals and aspirations. Fiadh is an activist who has created the People's Library ABQ. She has been an activist organizer in many different spaces for a while now, but within the last year and a half, she's decided to create a lending library of radical books and zines. The People's Library ABQ describes itself as, quote, a community project of leftist theory, anarchist history, and radical education. We have books about queer, feminist, anti-racist theory, indigenous resistance, transformative justice, philosophy, and revolutionary thought. In today's episode, we sat down with Fiadh to discuss her inspirations for her project and to learn how it works and how she would like it to grow in order to offer works that inspire the radical imagination to a broader audience. Let's turn now to our discussion with Fiadh. All right, welcome everybody. We're here with Fiadh from the People's Library of Albuquerque. Welcome, Fiadh, to the program.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm very excited to speak with you about the project that you're doing. So let me ask you a little bit. Let's just get into this. I'd like to know, what is the People's Library of Albuquerque and how does it work?
So the People's Library of Albuquerque is an independent lending library that focuses on leftist thought and activism. It's based on a lot of my personal political ideology, and then whatever people kind of want to learn more about, I want to get them information on, and stuff that I never thought would come into my worldview, but definitely has to do with our history as activists, our history as organizers, grassroots movements. Not that long ago, a UNM professor unfortunately died, and he had a huge book collection. He taught philosophy at UNM, and similar to what you teach. And he had a massive collection of Appalachian movements, shirtwaist, the Triangle Shirtwaist Strikes, indigenous activism. And so we got a ton of books that I would never have thought to even look for, but I was like, yeah, we definitely want to have stuff about that.
So how does the project work exactly? You have this big collection of books. I mean, do you have a physical space, or like, where does the collection exist?
I have a physical space in that I am taking up entirely too much of my very small house with 1 million books. I am very grateful that about a third of our collection is ebooks, because we have, I think, about 700 physical books and zines in our collection, housed between 4 large bookshelves in my living room. When I separated from my wife earlier this year, I kind of had to make a decision of, am I taking the People's Library with me, or am I taking my personal book collection? So my ex-wife now has all of my fiction and all of those books, which is fine. She will take good care of them. But I moved into a much smaller house, and the library moved with me. And it's grown quite a bit even since moving in January, which we're grateful for. But basically, I house the library. We now have an online catalog thanks to a librarian by trade, data analyst by profession, who helped us develop a website and database to house everything. We were previously just using Google Sheets, and I was manually cataloging everything, which was time consuming. And people either get connected to me via Instagram or via Facebook, or they hear about the project. They go look at the catalog, find what they want to check out, or they ask me for book recommendations. I love when that happens. And then I gather up their book, check it out on our database, and drive it over to them and do a book drop to their front door.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, so you do you're essentially a bookmobile kind of library.
Well, it's interesting that you put it that way, because that was the original dream that started this. Are you familiar with the Carter Johnson Leather Library?
Oh, yeah.
So we, my best friends and I, we used to have an organization called the New Mexico Fat Lifers, and we hosted the Carter Johnson Leather Library here twice for our big conference called Evolution of the Revolution. And I was so inspired and moved by that project, and the idea that we had never been alone. No matter how alone you think you are in any given moment, you have never been alone. You have a global history standing behind you for whatever you're into. And I had a fantasy of being able to get political education out to people out of the back of my minivan. Now, granted, we've grown to the point that it will no longer fit in my minivan, but I still do want to kind of pare down our collection and carry some essentials and install shelves in the back of my van and be able to go out on the streets and get political education to people. I'm inspired by the work of mutual aid books on Instagram, and they just go hand out books, and they do a lot of fundraising to just be able to buy books. They're not a library per se, but they make it their mission to get books into the hands of people, and I love that.
So you have this collection of stuff. People get a hold of you, and they let you know that they'd like to have part of your collection or to check it out. Do they have to be members, or
no?
Okay, so
you don't have to be a member. You don't even have to give me your real name. I just ask for a way of contacting you. I do once a month book reminders, but there's absolutely no time limit on how long a book can be out. Right now, I have books that have been out since November because they went to busy parents. They went to people who have to slave under capitalism 40 hours a week. People don't have the time to read as much as they like to think they would, but I still want them to have access to the materials. So once a month, I just message you on your social messaging application of your choice and say, hey, this is just a reminder. If you want to schedule a pickup, I can be there tonight. I can be there tomorrow. or if you want to check it out for another 30 days, it's all yours.
Wow. Okay. So, but is the expectation that the book will come back, or is
the expectation is the book that comes back? But I don't really have any. I'm not hard pressed about it. Like, it is at its core an anarchist movement, and I believe that anarchism is supported when a community believes in a project. I believe that people want to support a library, and we all basically know how libraries work. But I also know that sometimes somebody's need is greater than your ideas about how a project is going to work. And sometimes the book is not going to come back to me. Somebody was in a tizzy last week because their kids colored all over 4 or 5 of our children's books, and they didn't know how to tell me. And I was like, we just buy new books. It's fine. We just replace them, or we buy different books. It's okay. It's all transient.
Right. So how do you acquire most of your collection? You said that you got a donation from a former academic, but you know, and looking at the list of stuff that I've seen online, a lot of your collection comes from the publishers PM and AK Press. Where do most of the books come from?
So we have 2 book subscriptions. We are signed up for both Friends of AK Press and Friends of PM Press. So every month we get a small package of books from them, whatever they've newly published. I also buy a lot of books, or did until very recently, from them. I watch sort of the trending conversations among the activist community in Albuquerque and surrounding areas. And I see a big conversation that was happening a couple of weeks ago was about destigmatizing substance use and depathologizing harm reduction. And so I bought a couple books, one by Dr. Carl Hart that has to do with talking about drug use as pleasure activism rather than strictly harm reduction. And I like that turn of framework, and I wanted to expose more people to that idea. So when I see a conversation happening among groups of people, when I see somebody coming into the community who's newly radicalized, I want to get them really solid 101 information, and I will specifically hunt down good text for that so I can get them to them.
Wow, that's very cool. So, you know, AK and PM, of course, you know, are well known as anarchist press. Do a lot of stuff on anarchist theory, anarchist history, horizontalism in general. Is anarchism an explicit part of your project and the formation of how you're thinking about doing this? You said that, you know, you're inspired by this, but is the core idea of the Albuquerque, of the People's Library of Albuquerque, an anarchist ideal?
I think that it would be impossible for me to separate the core ideals of the library from my core ideals. And I think that's true anytime you start a project. So I move through this project and operate this project as an anarchist. But my goal in having the library is to have a school of leftist thought. So while it can be argued that sex work operates under capitalism and isn't strictly anarchist, I would divest from that opinion and say sex work is inherently anarchist, and therefore we should have books about sex work in the library, because sex work runs against the grain of what is homogenized. So what I'm looking for is anything that expands beyond the whitewashed imperialist history that we're taught and gives the power back to the people. And that can look so many ways. I have a couple of books of poetry by sex workers. I have Chicana literature, college readers. I have all kinds of stuff that I believe gives people a sense of connection to our parallel histories and reinforces the idea that there is no liberation without all of us getting liberated. So the library, it is an anarchist library because I am an anarchist, but really the goal is to make it a leftist library.
And so you try to not just have anarchist books, but books that kind of try to expand people's sense of history and awareness and imagination towards collective liberation in some sense.
Mm-hmm. I love our fiction collection. I'm very fond of it. We have a lot of Ursula Le Guin, N.K. Jemisin. I love Afrofuturism, dystopian futurism. I love this idea. I keep coming back to the idea when I try to add fiction books to our collection that we actually don't have to create a radical future. The blueprints have already been laid out for us. We have all of this dynamic thought about how collectivism can look in the future that's just been labeled science fiction and dismissed as a soft genre. But these are real blueprints for what we could be creating instead of what we have. And when I think about adding a fiction book to me, I'm like, is this escapism or is this collective building?
How do you decide that between escapism and sort of?
I don't think there's anything wrong with having escapism. I just want to make sure that escapism is in line with what I envisioned for the project.
Right.
Or the author is in line with the project. Like we have a lot of Jane Yolen, and she's an indigenous author that I really respect. Her books are not about building a future. They're about telling a story, and it's a really good story. But I think for me, the fiction that I want to include, I want to inspire. And I want people to get something out of it that starts turning the wheels in their head just as much as reading Errico Maesta. Like, I want people to take something from it that builds it from their small family unit to their interpersonal work to how they interact with the community. And fiction can be a great tool to do that when done right.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about your inspirations for doing this. Libraries have this sort of like, apart from public libraries, there are, this project that started maybe a little more than a decade ago, the little libraries, where people put these like small boxes in their neighborhoods for neighbors to take books and things like that. And then, during the Occupy movement, say about 10 years ago, one of the central features of Occupy Wall Street was, of course, the People's Library there that started to collect thousands of volumes before it was finally trashed by the New York Police Department and all those volumes were destroyed. But for a while, right, that was a really vibrant place where people could come from all over the place and get books for free, right? And they were getting donations from publishers and from authors, and they were hosting conversations, and so it was a really sort of kind of vibrant, intellectual liberatory space for the movement there. I wonder what inspired you to direct your activism towards libraries, and did you know about the Occupy libraries? And
I knew a little bit about the Occupy Library, but I would not say that was a direct influence. As nerdy as it sounds, I'm a kid who grew up getting lost in books. I'm a kid who grew up looking forward to the library like other people look forward to going to the park. I loved libraries. And I think if college education hadn't had so many barriers for me, I might have gone into library sciences. And I'm 35 years old, and I got to sit down and say, fuck having a degree, fuck having the paperwork. I actually can just run a library. I don't need the state's permission to do it. I can get people books. I stumbled upon PM Press one day, and I signed up to be a friend of PM Press just so that I could get some new books for me. Yeah. I thought when I was done with them, and maybe I would go, guerrilla stalk all the little libraries with anarchist books. And I was sitting there and I was like, or we could do this other thing. And I think this other thing will be really cool. I don't know if it'll be cool yet, but the project started with 7 books. It started with 7 books, and I kept those 7 books in my car because I envisioned it as a mobile library. And then it grew. We got a donation of 40 books, and that was a little bit more unmanageable to live in my car. And then we kept getting more packages from AK Press and PM Press and more donations, or somebody would message me and they'd say, hey, I noticed you don't have milkweed in your collection. I think it would be a great addition. I bought you a copy. Just people wanting to be part of this. And a lot of it is other book nerds who love books and want to see people have access to books. It's really a bread and roses kind of love. Like, I go out and I do a twice monthly food share where I cook for about 50 people. And I would love to pair that with having the library on the road with me and being able to give people food and a book.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that specifically, right? I was wondering whether you have paired with other sorts of activist projects or with other movements, because I know one of the things that, some of the Occupy libraries I remember had mobile components where they would, like, if there was a demonstration going on, they would like take a bunch of books to that site and have them available and things like that. Have you thought about doing that, or have you done that in any kind of way?
So a little more than a year ago, we had what turned into a protest. It started as a prayer circle that became occupied by the New Mexico Civil Guard, which is an armed militia. And then we had some police show up in riot gear, and it turned into a really scary event where a friend and comrade got shot. And since then, I have taken a step back from doing as many in-person protests. Only because I ended up getting doxxed from that. And that was, a little terrifying. So I have done some vehicle support. I've done some extraction work, but I don't tend to go and be on the front lines as much anymore. But I would love to show up and be the book lady at an event. I don't necessarily have to be in security mode like I have been for most of my life. I can do something else. And I'd like to see the way that plays out as we see people take to the streets more in Albuquerque.
So let me ask you a little bit about the usage of the library.
Mm-hmm.
What seems to be most popular? What are people asking to check out from the library? What have you seen? Are there any sort of trends, or is it just all over the place?
It's pretty much all over the place. I think a big thing that I see are people wanting introductory texts. Some of the higher level theoretical work doesn't get checked out as much. And I kind of have to remind myself, I'm sure that the public library has tons of books that have never been checked out too. That's okay. We're still going to stock them. But I have people who have come to me and said, I'm a Black woman in America. Yeah, fuck the police. But what do we do after? And I get to be like, here are some books about what we can look like, what we can build without cops. Or I have a friend who wants to get into being a midwife. And so I have a couple of books on birth work as care work, for example, about activism within the mothering community. For Mother's Day, we did a feature on all the parenting books that we have that have to do with being an activist and a parent. And those were pretty popular for a lot of the people who have not felt welcomed in frontline circles because they have kids and it's not always a safe place to bring your kids. So it seems to me that when we do a feature on something, people are like, oh yeah, I didn't know I care about that, but I really want to know more about that. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is just raise people's awareness of what is in the library, and also foster people on their individual paths. If I know somebody is newly sober, I will go out and buy a couple of books about like straight edge radical sobriety, and just let them know that we have those books available to them to support them in that sobriety, and however they want that to look. Like I said, I try to be really tuned into the conversation happening in Albuquerque at large, but also what's going on with the activists that I know. Where are you at in your personal study and growth?
That makes sense. I wonder whether you have talked with other activists in other places, whether other people have been inspired by what you're doing in Albuquerque to think about doing libraries in this kind of way elsewhere.
There was a brief conversation happening about a People's Library Santa Fe, and they envisioned it looking very different. We had a couple of brain dumping sessions where I told them where I got books, how I run the library. I gave them access to all of our back-end data management stuff. At the time, we were still using Google Sheets, so that they could see how things were cataloged. And I don't know that they've picked up on that project, but I know there is interest in doing a Santa Fe library, which would be great because theoretically we could do interlibrary loans and get more access to people, which I love. I can't make the trip up to Santa Fe, 3 times a week on my own, but I would be happy to meet with them on a Saturday and give them 15 books that they need for the week. So I hope they do it.
That's quite a lot. I mean, do you know of any other projects anywhere else in the country that are like this?
There is a people's library. I'm blanking on where it is. I want to say Tennessee. That is like a coffee shop, mutual aid book pop-up. From what I can tell, I don't know that it's leftist leaning or anything like that, but I do know when I went to create things with the People's Library that one existed, and that's why I had to be careful to tag it Albuquerque. And I know that some friends in Seattle are doing the idea of taking anarchist texts and placing them in little libraries.
Oh, okay, very cool. I mean, have you encountered any kind of obstacles in operating the library at all? I mean, one is, of course, just the time, and it seems like, there's a lot of time involved in trying to transport things back and forth. Albuquerque is a very sort of sprawly city, so that's quite a lot of ground to cover. But are there other obstacles that you've encountered in running this?
I think a big obstacle that we have in running this is that it's very limited to social media. In that if you don't have access to Facebook or Instagram, you may never know about this project, and therefore you can't access the books. If you don't have access to the internet, you can't go look at our library catalog. It's one of the reasons I want to pair the food share project with the library project. I just need to figure out a feasible way of doing that. And also that carries a much higher risk of a book not coming back to you, which is fine, but that does narrow down what books I want to bring out with me. I want to take things that we have doubles of and stuff like that. And I'm just not at a place where I can do that concretely yet, but I think it's a real accessibility issue that only people with social media and internet can access the library right now. That's problematic in and of itself. But then there's also there's operational errors. Like I just lost my 9-to-5 job, and so I had to pause our book subscriptions for the month. And I have not been able to buy books in 6 weeks, and it's killing me because I have nothing new to catalog. I have no new book editions in the last 6 weeks, which is unheard of since we started the project in October. It's entirely a project of love. We have 2 wonderful, super amazing Patreon supporters that help offset the cost of our book subscription, but we are nowhere near having the financial backing to make this an independently run library. And so that's a real problem in terms of growing the library. But I also sit back and think, we've got a collection of over 900 items. We don't need to be focused on growth. We need to be focused on access.
Because you said a lot of your stuff too is e-collection, right? So that could be something that you get out.
Yeah, we've got about 275 ebooks, and those are mostly in PDF and .epub files. That's been really helpful for getting people books. We've only had about 10 people ask for the download links, but I really like the idea. I'd like to figure out a way to get audiobooks as part of the library to increase accessibility. But the addition of ebooks and also like PM Press, if you buy books from them, you automatically get the ebook version of it, which I love. Right. But that opens up the accessibility for people who use text readers and need visual accessibility issues. But audiobooks would be a really great addition, and there's just no way to acquire those in any safe way, besides shelling out a lot of money for ebooks, for audiobooks. So it's just a thing I play around with. I love to read out loud, and I've toyed with the idea of just picking a book and reading chapters and recording them myself and making books, slowly more accessible that way. But it would take a very long time for me to read through all of our books. So it's, it's an idea. It's not the best idea yet.
Have you, so most of this sounds like this is, your own work. Is there a collective behind the People's Library, or?
No, it's me.
It's you. Have you thought about making a collective, or is it something that you want to hold on to right now as you develop it?
Most of my activist life I spent doing things as a group project. And I love the collectives that I work with. I work with a harm reduction collective. I've worked with community defense leagues. But it feels really good to have a project that's just mine, and I don't have to account to anybody, and nothing goes up to vote. And if I want to buy a new book, I just buy the new book. And sometimes there's a lot of freedom in having something that you solely own and operate.
Sure, that makes sense. So do you have a Patreon account set specifically for the library, or are there ways that people can support the library if they're so interested in doing?
Yeah, we have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/thepeopleslibraryabq. We also have Cash App and Venmo, both at the People's Library ABQ, if you want to make a one-time donation.
Okay, we'll make sure to get those links out for people to be able to contribute if they'd like.
Awesome. If they want to, that'd be great. And if not, okay. If you don't live anywhere near me and you find an ebook, we do long distance ebook lending.
Well, I was going to say, with that kind of, if you're doing stuff on the internet, this could be a much more widespread project than just Albuquerque.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I would love to get audiobooks, and one of the reasons I am so very fond of our ebook collection is because it opens it up to anybody wanting to borrow a book. I mean, you can live in Trinidad and borrow a book from the People's Library ABQ, which is awesome. We have them. There's no reason people shouldn't be able to access them. The vast majority of them have come from the harm reduction collective that I am in. Had a pretty sizable 40 or so collection of ebooks. I download everything I possibly can from PM Press when I buy books. And we've bought a couple of ebooks on request from AK Press. And then also just coming across really dope PDFs on the internet that are great additions. We have one that I'm reading right now, which is an A to Z guide to harm reduction. And it's very neat. It's part homeopathic, part urban farming, part foraging. It's really nifty.
Very cool. So what's what's next for the library? What's next for you as an organizer?
My next personal goal is to become a Narcan distributing trainer. When I do the food share twice a month, I also pass out fentanyl test strips, but my supply of Narcan is so limited. I think it's kind of a disservice to pass out fentanyl test strips without passing out Narcan as well. Excuse me. And there is a organization that will do distribution training for individuals and then give you a supply of Narcan that you can get out to the streets, which I really love that idea. What's next for the library is figuring out how to improve accessibility and not just exist in the internet. Making sure more people know about the project and have access to books, and increasing the access for the disability access for people who do want to access our books. I'm a big fan of accessibility. There's that saying, if it's not accessible to the poor, it's neither radical nor revolutionary. And I always meant to say, if it's not accessible to the poor or disabled, it's neither revolutionary nor radical. So It's really important to me that the collection doesn't stagnate because people don't feel like they have enough time, need accommodations, live far away, anything like that. At some point, I'd like to have the entire library exist in ebook format as well as hard copy format, but that's a long ways off. It's just a pipe dream right now.
Well, Fiadh, thank you for your time and sharing with us and telling us a little bit about this, your exciting project. And do you have a website, or are you mostly on social media?
Our catalog website is radicalbooksabq.libib.com, and that's where you can view the two collections. We have a DVD and musical CD collection, and then also a books and ebooks and zines library.
Very cool. So we'll try to make sure that people have access both to ways of supporting the library and then also trying to find stuff on the collection. But I want to thank you for your time and for the work that you're doing. Much success. I hope that we're able to bump up some attention for you and get you a little bit of help making this worthwhile project get even more off the ground.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the conversation and for the boost and just spreading the word. And I hope that it inspires somebody to start their own local library.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Fiadh. And thank you all for turning in to listen to our conversation. If you have any questions or comments about the radical nature of people's libraries, the history of radical book lending, leave us a comment down below. Send us a question. You can find the Anarres Project at our website at anarresproject.org. You can find us on all the socials at Anarres Project on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you can also listen to our audio podcasts on Spotify and Anchor FM or in other places where you download your podcasts. So thanks very much for listening. Thank you, Fiadh. Hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Bye.